Hey there, Stampers. My name is Sherry Roth. I'm a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator from Sherwood Park, Alberta, Canada. And today I'm here to share another idea on how to use embossing paste. So this is my second video in a series of 3 so far. And in the first video, I share tips on how to use embossing paste, how to keep your tools clean, that type of thing. I will link that video below. And then today we're going to emboss on the embossing paste. And then in the next video, the third video of this series, we are going to color the embossing paste and then add a bit of shimmer to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, first of all, what you will need is you will need a mask, or a stencil. So this stencil pack is the, what pack is it? The basic masks from the annual, or sorry, not from the annual catalog. These were in the 2019 holiday catalog, and they carried over. So you can still find them online. I'll have a full description with links below in the description, but if you're looking online, you'll find them under, I think it's Holiday Catalog Favorites. So there is a polka dot one, which we are using in the next video. There is this beautiful, I don't even know what to call those, but this beautiful mask, which we're using today. There's this woodland one, or almost like a forest. And then there's this one. This is really pretty as well. Okay, so we're going to use that particular mask today. And we're also going to use the Happy Birthday to You stamp set. So this is a stamp set that is available for free with a $60 purchase until the end of March of 2020. And it has coordinating dies as well. We aren't using actually the cake image or the coordinating dies that go with this. We're just using the greetings from this set on this particular card. Okay? So the other thing that you will need, of course, is embossing paste. And then if you're doing this technique, you will want some embossing powder. And we are using the Shimmer White embossing powder today. And then you'll need a palette knife. So we have a set of 3 palette knives in the catalog. They come with this one that's quite thick, and then one that's a little bit thinner and has a pointy tip. Okay, so I'm gonna pull in a piece of scrap paper, and I've got a piece of Whisper White cardstock that measures 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. I'm just going to use a little bit of temporary adhesive to hold my cardstock in place. Now, Stampin' Up! Doesn't carry temporary adhesive. You might be able to find it at your local scrapbook store, but you can also just use a tiny bit of snail adhesive, or even just use a little bit of this and let it dry first, and then it will stick temporarily on there. And then I'm going to place my mask over top. Now, I am going to center it. Now, I have lots of room to hang on to the mask around the edges, but if you were using a larger piece that was closer in size to the size of your stencil, you could use washi tape to tape it down and hold it in place. Okay, so I'm going to use my embossing paste and just scoop out a little bit. And I just want to make sure that this is straight. I think that looks good. So I'm just going to place it on there. And then I want to cover the entire surface. You don't have to. You can just add embossing paste in certain areas, but I want to fill the surface. Okay, so I'm pushing quite hard. You can see by the shape of the palette knife that I'm pushing quite hard. I'm gonna grab a little bit more here. And just spread it around. Embossing paste does dry pretty quickly. So you don't necessarily have to work super fast, but you want to make sure that you get your tools, like your stencils and your palette knives and anything else that you might use, into water pretty quickly after you use them, because you want to be able to easily get that paste off of your stencils. Okay, so now I'm just going over it, and I'm kind of smoothing it out and removing any excess. This I'll just scrape back into my jar, and then I will put the lid back on. this I'm going to dump into, I've got a tub of water off to the side, which I'll share with you in a moment. And I'm gonna peel this off. Look how pretty that is, even just like that. This is immediately going into my tub of water until I can get to it to clean it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my shimmer white embossing powder, and I'm basically going to just dump it right on. And then I'll grab another scrap piece of paper. And this is basically gonna just be my funnel so that I can dump it back into my container. So I'll just give that a little shake, make sure that's fully covered, dump off the excess. I'm gonna flip it over, give it a couple taps. So that's what it looks like right now. Isn't that beautiful? Can you see that shimmer? It's so pretty. Okay, so now let's dump this back into the container. Okay, and now I'm gonna have glitter everywhere. Okay, so I have got a paper towel, a damp paper towel here, so I'm just gonna take this, give this a wipe. Okay. All right, so now what we're gonna do, we're gonna just set this aside for now because you want it to dry, the paste to dry before you heat it. If you heat your paste when it's still wet, it'll start to bubble, and you may want that look, and that's fine. There might be a project where you want it to be a little bit more bubbly and textured, but I want it to be a relatively, I mean, it's not gonna be smooth because it is embossing paste and it adds texture, but I want it to be, I don't want it to be bubbly in spots. So I wanna let that dry before I heat it up, okay? So while I'm waiting, I've got a piece of purple posy cardstock that measures 4 1/4 by 11. It's scored at 4.5 inches. I'm just going to fold that down the center. Use my bone folder, make it nice and crisp. I've got another piece of 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 white cardstock. So this is just gonna be my guide. So that's where my cardstock is, my textured cardstock is going to go. And then I've got a 1/4 inch by 4 1/4 inch strip of Blackberry Bliss. That's gonna go over the top. So I'm just gonna set those there because that will give me placement for my greeting that's gonna go up at the top. So now I'm gonna pull back my Happy Birthday to You stamp set. I'm going to use the word celebrate. Grab a block. And I like to use my grid. I'll put my block, line it up with the grid line, and then I line up my word with one of the other lines so that it's straight. And then I'm gonna pull in my Blackberry Bliss ink pad. Oh, I guess we should go back and clean our stencil, hey? Okay, let me stamp this and then we'll go back and do that. So I'm just inking this up with Blackberry Bliss, and I'm gonna try to get right over top and stamp this on here, like so. And then we'll close this up, and then before we go any further, there are a couple things that I'm going to do in the center of the card, but let's get this cleaned up so that we don't ruin our tools here. Okay, so I've been filming videos all morning, so I've got stuff all over the place. Okay, so this is just some warm water, which isn't so warm anymore because this is the 3rd video that I've filmed. So I'm just using my fingers and getting all of that embossing paste off of there. And then I've got a piece of paper towel here that I'm just resting it on. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with my mask. I'm just going to use my fingers and just make sure that there's no clumps of embossing paste in any of the grooves, and try to get off as much of it as I can from the top and the bottom of the stencil. So you wanna make sure that you clean both sides. And as long as you put it into the water right after you use it, it comes clean pretty easily. It's if you let it dry on your stencil that it can cause some problems. Okay, so now I've got my paper towel. I'll just set that on top. And if I wanted to use this again immediately, I could just take a paper towel or a cloth and just carefully dry it, and then it would be perfectly good to use again. Okay, but we will just set that aside. It's all nice and clean. It can air dry. I'll take another paper towel here and just wipe my surface. I apologize if I'm wobbling the camera here. Okay, so that's all clean. Now we can go back to our card base. Let's bring the card back here. Okay, so now I've got the inside of my card. This is just a piece of Whisper White cardstock that measures 4 by 5 1/4. And I'm going to give this stamp a clean because I want to use the block. So I like to stamp off as much as I can before I clean my stamps on my chamois, because then it cleans it keeps my chamois cleaner for a little bit longer. Okay. So now I'll take this off, and where did my stamp case go? Here it is. And then I'm gonna pull in the happy birthday greeting. Again, I'm gonna line up my clear block with the grid. And then I'm using the lines that are on there, I think that looks okay, to line up the happy birthday. Then I'll pull in the Blackberry Bliss ink again, and this is going to go just in the center. And again, if you line up your cardstock so that it's straight, you can use, especially for a long greeting, you can use those lines as a guide. So there we go, got the happy birthday. So we'll close that up. The inside is done. Now this should be dry enough. Now just a little tip, you can leave this overnight. You can even leave it for days before you heat it, and it will still work. Let's just add this on the inside first before we go any further. I'm hoping I've left it long enough that it won't bubble up. We'll see. Okay, so I'm just centering that right in there. And then we'll set that aside until after we've heat embossed our piece. Now, I don't know if my heat tool, sometimes it reaches over, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm gonna bring over my heat tool, and it will just reach. This is as far as it'll go. So I'm gonna turn it on and I'm gonna heat it. It is really hard to see with this particular embossing powder. It's really hard to see it change. So what I was telling everybody at class the other night is when you think it's done, just rub your finger over it, and if no glitter comes onto your finger, then it's good, okay? So I'll just quickly do this. So I'm just going up and down the rows of patterns, and that way I know that I've covered all of the areas. Okay, let's just give this a test here. Yep, that looks good. So I like to usually just touch it in a few different areas just to make sure. Okay, so none of that embossing powder is coming off, so I know that that's done. I can pick that up, that's ready to go. Now I'll bring back my card base, and again, some of these, like because we've done it over the edge a little bit, I'm just going to take my scissors, or my snips, and just trim off anything that's kind of going over the edge a little bit. It's not much, but sometimes you end up with just a little bit of that embossing paste hanging off the edge, and this makes it a nice smooth finish. Okay, so I'll brush that out of the way. And then I'll use a little bit of multi-purpose glue, and I'll use more than I normally do. I normally say that a little bit goes a long way, but because this has some texture and it's a little bit warped, I'm doing it all the way around the edges. Normally I just do it in the 4 corners, and even a little bit down the middle, so you can see how much I've got there. It's still not a lot, and it's not very thick. And then I want it lined up with the bottom and both sides of my card base. That looks good. Just hold it down there for a second while it sets. And then I'll pull in my Blackberry Bliss strip. So again, this was a 1/4 inch by 4 1/4. So it's the width of the card, and that will just go across like this. This is a really, really simple card, but I think because of the texture and the shimmer, it's definitely a wow card. Mini glue dots might have been a better choice for that. We'll see if that sticks. Okay, and then the last thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit more bling. And this isn't really bling. I'm just going to add some metallic pearls on here. You should see my desk. It is a disaster. I'm just looking for my paper piercing tool. Here we go. So I'm going to peel off 3 of these. When I use anything like this, I like to just use my paper piercing tool and just get right under the adhesive and pick it off. It helps. It's much easier than picking it off with your fingers. And then you can position it and then just hold it in place. And there we go. There's our card. So celebrate and then happy birthday. So like I said, this is the 2nd video in this series. There'll be one more, at least one more, possibly 2. So you can check my YouTube channel for that. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up. I always appreciate those thumbs. And if you are not yet a subscriber, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos that I post. All right, thanks so much for watching.